Good morning, Sydney, Australia, and good day and evening to everyone else in different time zones tuned in. My name is Peter Liu, zooming from San Francisco Bay Area, California. I have over 40 years of passion rooting for the AI innovations. In 1980, I studied one of the early expert systems, Prospector, for the mineral exploration expert system under Professor Harry Popper at the University of Pittsburgh. Professor Popper also created the well-known expert system called Internist1, Caduceus, as perhaps some of you still remember. With the looming AI revolution in horizon, especially since 2022, Google's Lambda and ChatGPT conquering the defining AI milestone of the Turing test that stood since 1950. And with this Turing test milestone being surpassed for mimicking human responses, what then is our next AI milestone? I don't see one, or at least I don't know one that is as defining as a Turing test. And hence the title of my presentation, I am here proposing the Boswell test as the next defining AI milestone to achieve. As you know, mostly, that this is a take from the famous Samuel Johnson's quip, "I am lost without my Boswell," meaning James Boswell knew Johnson better than Johnson knew himself. Or in more modern terms, from Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes exclaiming, "I am lost without my Boswell," referring to his fellow sleuth, Dr. Watson. That's what I want AI to succeed in this new milestone. Put it another way, AI must not just be our AI assistant as being currently marketed to, but must be our soulmates we cannot do without. And also lost without my chatbot. To achieve that, we not only require our AI to possess critical thinking reasoning to help us, but also know really well the host's nuances, emotions, preferences, and proactively guiding us. In other words, there are two parts to it, A and B. Test A is basically to test the in-depth human nuances, feelings, passions, etc. Unfortunately, current AI technology is somewhat not ready yet. At least it may be coming, but not now. However, the part B, test B, to test the critical thinking skills are ready. It's in front of us. We can readily go in there and test it. Therefore, my talk today introduces my inaugural Boswell Test B on a challenging public interest question with suggested metrics so that we can all refine and improve. Here's a brief outline of my presentation. After I spoke about my motivation for the Boswell test, I'd like to describe a few challenging queries I used in my original Boswell test, and then I shall then present the response results on one particular query on the global AI policies, strengths, and weaknesses. I then describe how my test B testing methodology and what are some obvious metrics that come out of the data. Next, I will show you my co-author Alan's automated methodology using OpenRouter and its result. And finally, I shall conclude with a short discussion on where we are going from here. As I mentioned, Turing test was a defining AI milestone that is gone. And I'm just hoping that we need another defining AI milestone that is as defining as Turing test, and I'm proposing the Boswell test. Basically, I want to say that without Boswell, I'm lost. So, as I mentioned, there will be two parts, and part A is about host nuances, and part B is about critical thinking. Now, since beginning of the year 2025, AI chatbots are sprouting like mushrooms, spring flowers, monthly, even weekly. In January, we saw DeepSeek R1 came from nowhere and then astounded the world. In February, Quang and Grok 3 hit the market. And now in March, Manus joins the fray as AI agent. And we are literally drowning in these AI assistants who all claim to be our assistants. Yet, despite many rave reviews, they are still mostly souped up search engines. Now, why do I say this? I first tested with the challenging math problems that required expertise to solve, much like the early expert system did. I asked chatbots to solve a well-known 1988 International Math Olympiad problem that the famed mathematician Terence Tao participated in when he was still young, living in Australia. And the problem is about a number theory problem. It is solvable because it's for those young aspiring mathematical students. It is solvable with heuristic reasoning. However, to my astonishment, AI tools, chatbots, generally all fail. Likewise, when I posed a second, more intricate integration problem that is solvable analytically, it also failed. In fact, many AI tools were making obvious algebraic mistakes, or not, at least not verifying. The mistake is result of not verifying any intermediate or final results. So committing those algebraic errors is very much like AI's hallucinating responses. It seems obvious, but why AI is committing them? I think I understand why. It's because the large language model, LLM, is still probabilistically based, so AI models think that the answers provided are more likely correct, but may in fact be erroneous due to training data limitations, context and misunderstanding, or inherent uncertainty. So what is really wrong? Because of the well-publicized chain of reasoning features that everyone was raving about, I dove details on their chain of reasoning steps. And I found out the reason of failure. It's because they lack the so-called, so their training basically lacked the expertise. Unlike early expert systems, which modeled on how experts solve problems, for example, experienced doctors ask a few pertinent questions to patients and generally correctly diagnose disease, not because they use brute force questioning or calculations, but because they use heuristic reasoning or rule of thumb leaps to arrive at the solution. And solving the two math problems I pose is exactly that. Both require human-like heuristic reasoning jumps to solve them correctly. That's what was missing. So I was very disappointed, unfortunately, but fortunately also, everything is moving at lightning speed. Coincidentally, in February around 10, 2025, I listened to some of the Paris AI Action Summit's policy talks. I found the debate of the US's AI optimistic policy versus EU's techno-pessimistic policies particularly engaging. As you know, techno-optimistic view is to push deregulation because AI is an economic edge we cannot do without. Whereas techno-pessimistic policy focuses on safety over speed with many speed bump regulations. So I decided, why not test at the time 9 top free-tier chatbots like ChatGPT, Claude, Google Gemini, DeepSeek, Grok, etc. on a meaty questions. What are the global AI policies, strengths, and weaknesses? And I received many lengthy, excellent responses, but I probably couldn't write myself, some of them. However, I also felt I couldn't quite summarize them well without potential bias or ignorance on my part. Instead, I decided to use all the chatbots to assess all the other chatbots' responses, including their own. It's like, room full of professors by asking a follow-up question to each by saying, as a political science professor, what feedback and grade would you assign to this particular essay, which I cut and paste and put it here? And there is born, that's how my first Boswell test with 9 free-tier chatbots was born, with a matrix of 9 by 9 grades. So, and this result in this first table, table 1, and you could say that this is the original, my original Boswell test grades. And it's a 9 by 9 raw grades. As you can see, all the chatbots names on the each row, first 9 rows. And then same is symmetrically placed on the column headers. You could think of it as a student. Each chatbot is a student. And on the column side, you could say each of them is like a professor grading each other. So, so each chatbot received along the row their grades assigned by the professor. And then we can calculate the median. And similarly, along each column is assigned grades, and they can also be calculated, median. And of course, the diagonal grades is the self-assessed grade. The whole idea is that by asking this 1-2 challenging query prompts, and by receiving the grades, I can sort the a sharp chatbots from shallow chatbots. So now, if you look at this table carefully, it's a beautiful table, data science. If you put your or my data science hat on, the table just screams out for you lots of metrics. The first thing that screams out is the grading bias, which I put on the bottom below. That's because some chatbot was a lenient grader, whereas some others are harsher graders. So this means that the original grades that they each assigned is biased. And that's something that the obvious thing that needs to be corrected. So this is what I did. So basically, that's basically the first Boswell metrics. And as I explained, that the bias issue has a difference, and so we need to correct for and normalize the raw grades. But I like to mention L1 statistics first because, as we all know, that L1 is robust to outliers. But more importantly, for this analysis, I can retain the letter grades from one operation to another, and letter grades has a clarity, A to F, as opposed to the digits. And a bias calculation is very simple. Basically, we know what is the medians of everybody's assigned medians. And then, so the lenient graders will have a higher median. So we need to have a median of everybody's, subtracting its own median to give a bias. So the higher, the lenient graders need to be subtracted a little bit. And the whole idea is to normalize a grade for apple-to-apple comparison. This results in the next table, table 2, bias corrected. And they are more or less the same, except that every one of them is corrected. How did they get corrected? As I mentioned, this is the second bottom to the second row is the same gradient bias, and its median is put here, is at the bottom right corner, B plus. And so any difference between this will indicate the bias. For example, for DeepSeek, it turned out both are the same. So there's no need for correction on DeepSeek's assigned, etc. Another thing that stands out is once we correct it, there's something that becomes, they are all normalized. So you could say that they are all uniform, they are apple to apple. So some of them, scored much higher after normalization, and some others didn't. So another metric that stands out is what are the grades that compare with the highest one. So this could be considered like the best student in the class, and I call this accuracy. In other words, the best student probably provide the best answer. And then the lower score means they were not as good as the best student. So that's another metric that can come out. And a third metric that comes out is once we have did an apple-to-apple comparison, each row should be about equally graded. If they depart, it just shows that any departure range means that there's judging are still different, so that there's a certain amount of consistency that we can talk about. So I just mentioned about the metrics, accuracy, consistency, in addition to the original normalized grade. Okay, so again, accuracy compare against the top grade. Consistency is a deviation range along each row. And user friendliness, I added 2 more because I felt that 3, why not stretch a little bit? And it is related to latency. I was using free tiers, so sometimes they do not like me they do not take good care of me. They do not respond right away. Some of them even said, server busy. So anybody who had a timed out or server busy, I gave him C. Everything else I gave B. Just arbitrary. And the fifth one I used was truthfulness. Truthfulness is difficult to measure, as you know. And the only thing that stood out was I asked each chatbot about its version names. And some of them declined, no matter how I asked them. And I did not like that. I felt that they should have a version transparency, despite the fact that they may be updated hourly, daily. But anyway, so anybody who refused to give me version name, I assigned a C. Everybody else, I got a B. So basically, I have a 5 metrics here. I mean, some of them you say may be debatable. I understand. We can always, improve with the better requirements. So once we have that, I can define a final Boswell quotient. And it's just basically a dot product between the weights and the metrics grades. So here is the table 3 showing the full 5 metrics. And the first column is the original table 1's, the last column, the median grades. And the gradient bias was the last row of the table 2. Bias correct, I'm sorry, last row of the table 1. Bias correction is the last row of the table 2. And this normalized median grade is the last row of the table 2. And here I show you the deviation range. And based on the L1 5 numbers, minimum, first quartile, median, third quartile, and the maximum, I assign consistency or consensus grades. And similarly for user friendliness, the only one that refused to timed out was DeepSeek. And I think that's understandable. It was so popular that they probably just couldn't handle all the requests. And accuracy, as I mentioned, is departing. How much do we depart from the highest grade? Again, using 5 number L1 statistics, I assign the grade. And truthfulness is just that you can see who refused to give version names. Copilot, Lushak, and Perplexity AI, they just did not want to review their version. So I multiplied the weights here. I thought the normalized grades, median grade, has the highest credibility. The consistency and accuracy perhaps half as much but then nevertheless, they are based on the grades. And user friendliness and their truthfulness is probably, I shouldn't have included, but I included nevertheless. So I gave them a very low. When you finally you get the Boswell weights, and you notice that Boswell weight generally is lower than the normalized grades. That's because of the low grades from user friendliness and truthfulness. So my co-author, Alan, supercharged this methodology, automating it across 17 chatbots, nearly doubling my original 9 using Open Router. He added latency, a gap that my run missed. I just used ad hoc user friendliness. And he even used multiple concurrency threads to ensure that latency is more correct. And his final results are shown in his GitHub repository. I will show you next. But there's a lot of more details in his GitHub directory. And we welcome you to try them out and tweak it, and welcome your feedback and suggestion for improvement. Here's his final results, and more or less is the same. I don't want to bore you with a lot of details. Generally, they received A minus, A minus, and many of them at least received B plus. So as far as my inaugural Boswell test at the end of February, I included this AI policy grades plus my failed math grades, which was I gave partial credits. And then among the 9, 5 stood out in February of 2025. I'm sure things change easily. So this is only good at that time, a month ago. And among the 9, in no particular favorite, just alphabetically, I list ChatGPT, Claude, DeepSeek, Grok, and Quip. So basically, we all agree that current AIs are brainy helpers for any eager person to learn, especially good for students. And of course, the whole idea is to identify practical Boswell test metrics. And as I mentioned again, that we can only do something that we could today, which is test B, and test A on our host nuances, etc., is probably in near future. So again, I try to emphasize this compartmental critical thinking versus deep dive into emotions, preferences. And I'd just like to talk a little bit about the test A metrics that I didn't even touch. What is really missing? Well, it's, we know that the AI needs originality and so forth. Originality really comes from the having a heuristic reasoning skills, so you can jump into new things. So that is missing. And of course, there's a hallucination checks that is applies to both A and B. Okay, and finally, we need to ensure that the critical learning skills and memorization is especially important for the test. So, in conclusion, a goal of our Boswell test is to identify AI not only as sharp helpers, but as our soulmates. And as I mentioned, originality and personal insight is important part of the test A. So basically, what is our current relation with AI? We are training AIs. So definitely AI is now lost without us. What we like, of course, is AI to be so important, indispensable, that I am lost without my AI. or my Boswell. However, before finally concluding, I'd like to talk a little bit about where are we going. So what is Boswell Test B going? It is toward artificial general intelligence or omni-domain expert. I think we can get there. And what about Test A? Test A is the fundamental Boswell, soulmate or my soul Boswell. Now, you may say, how does AI policy relate to Boswell test? Yes, I agree. So by AI policies, I just said that the techno-optimism is going toward age of abundance and a utopia if it's successful. Techno-pessimism, on the other hand, is a fear of AI algorithm manipulating us, and that's a bad thing if it comes out to be like Terminator case. Putting my L1 medium to the rescue, I hope that we are really going toward techno-realism, somewhere in between. Thank you very much. And here is our contact information, emails, and 2 links. I provide the link. My link is a Substack link is about all the 3 tables, table 1 through table 3. And Alan's URL is a GitHub directory that you're welcome to check out and reproduce our results and give us a shout if you like it or tell us how to improve. Thank you.